Hello, my name is Laura Hartman, and I teach at Roanoke College. And what I wanted to share with y'all today is some information, some thoughts from the philosophy of environmental ethics. So I'm calling this Environmental Ethics 101. And these are some ideas that I discuss with my students and some things that I think about in my research. And I hope that you find them useful as you think about how to be an activist and how to be a citizen and how to care for our planet. So that picture, by the way, in the background of this first slide is the route of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which I know is an important environmental ethics issue in our area. So I want to start simply by asking what environmental ethics is. Well, we have to break it down. So ethics, to begin with, is the study of right and wrong, good and bad, and the reasons why. It's a little bit like your own opinion, but I didn't get a PhD in my own opinion. I got a PhD in other people's opinions and their reasons. Ethics is about how we can have a conversation about what is right and wrong. And when it comes to environmental issues, we have to have that conversation in a way that's clear and able to be communicated between people. Environment can be defined in multiple ways. So when we talk about environmental ethics, most people think about the first definition that I have there, which is the non-human natural world, especially wilderness, something that's out there. The environment seems to be something that's not human. And it is, and that stuff is super important. At the same time, a lot of people like to think about the environment as a place where we live, work, and play. Maybe the environment is around here, especially when you get to environmental justice. That's a concern about how environmental vectors can cause harm to people in maybe an urban environment. So there's a couple different ways to understand what environment means. As a field, we purposely don't define it in a real precise manner. We're kind of open to whoever says that they want to do environmental ethics. Okay, so I want to start with a case study because this is what we usually do in this field, is we look at a case study. So the case study here is simply, in a very general sense, polluting a river. It's probably wrong to pollute a river, but why? Well, there's lots of reasons that we could give for this. So if you were talking to somebody who thinks it's okay to pollute the river, you would need to figure out which of these reasons would appeal to them. So one option is to start with what we call anthropocentric environmental ethics. And this focuses on people. It says people could be harmed by this, and that's why we don't do it. A lot of our environmental issues, you can just stop there. You can just say, look, it harms people. Let's not harm people. Boom. Sometimes, though, with certain environmental issues, it's more effective to make a biocentric or an ecocentric argument. This is about causing harm to the ecosystem or the biome or the community of life. It's a little bit of a harder sell because a lot of people only want to focus on humans. But if you can get them to say, well, maybe I should care about non-humans, then you can make these biocentric or ecocentric arguments. So an ecocentric argument about polluting the river would have to do with the health of the fish and the health of the macroinvertebrates and the health of, maybe erosion, or, you could have living and non-living components to this ecosystem that might have value. Which brings us to the next idea, intrinsic versus instrumental value. How much do we value this river? Well, we could argue that we should not value the river for its use value. That would be that instrumental value. It's useful for disposing of waste. But rather, we should value it for its intrinsic value. It might have value in and of itself. And this one's harder to argue, but a lot of people feel this intuitively, that something like a river just should be and has value and should not be harmed. You get some religions, I'm thinking of Hinduism in India, for example, where rivers are goddesses. And if we pollute them, then we're causing damage to a goddess. So that's another way to see some intrinsic value to a thing, an entity like a river. And then finally, there might be a duty-based argument. Maybe it's not about the effects, maybe it's not about where value lies, maybe it's simply about being, about doing what we ought to be doing. We have a duty to other humans downstream, perhaps, or we might have a duty to the river itself to treat it with respect. And if we're taking that approach, we'll be talking about rights. Maybe people have a right to clean water down the river, or maybe the river itself has a right not to be polluted, or the creatures living in the river have a right not to have their homes polluted. You can see where those arguments can kind of go. I am actually most interested in a slightly different form of ethics that's called virtue ethics, and this is concerned with people. That is to say, people's character. So for this case, I would ask, polluting a river. Who does that? Like, who do you think you are when you pollute a river? What is your sense of self, and how do you justify that in terms of thinking that you're a good person? So this gets me to what I mainly want to talk about today, which is different models of human action in nature. Who are we humans with respect to the non-human world? What is our relationship, and what should it be? So for many people, we can start with this dominion or dominator model of humans in nature. And I love this image because you can see this human here is just taking and eating and consuming and producing, using up nature to produce human-made things like buildings and so forth. You might notice that there are warplanes flying overhead. So the artist in this image was interested in saying that war is a part of this sort of voraciousness that we have towards the natural world. You might also notice that the human has a little necklace in the shape of a cross. Now, it is not true that Christians or other people who follow the Bible have to see humans as dominion or dominators. But there is that word. It's in the Bible, dominion. It says God declares that humans should have dominion over the natural world. Nowadays, a lot of religious folks will debate what that term actually means. Maybe it doesn't mean behaving like this human is behaving. However, in the past, it has been used to justify some of our behaviors, where it basically seems like nature is for us. We can do what we need to with it. It's raw materials, it's objects, not subjects, right? These are all something, not someone. The animals, the plants, the rivers, they're things, and therefore it's not a big deal for us to use them. So this is a model of human action in nature that people who care about the environment usually don't like. But it's one that's in the back of most people's mind, and in our society, it's kind of implicit in everything we do. We basically do treat nature as if it is simply raw materials and nothing else. So what are the other options? Let's look at some other options for how humans might see ourselves in relation to nature. I really like this one. This one is the steward, the caretaker, the nurturer. Now, this one, there's still a hierarchy. Humans are still better than nature in this, but we have to be wise and careful, circumspect and respectful in the way that we treat the natural world. This is actually a portrait of Wendell Berry, who is one of my favorite authors. He writes about an agrarian view of life, where you're a nurturer. He uses the word nurture to talk about how humans should be relating to the land. And a lot of people of faith who, if they try to move away from that dominion model, they often move toward a stewardship model. So that's why I have the word steward here. Again, humans are still in control, they're still in charge, but we know that we have to do it with care, with respect, in a way that honors the natural systems and, you know, tries to shape them into what's good for us, but doesn't totally dominate them. Okay, here's another one. Another model of human action in nature. This is a portrait of St. Francis of Assisi, and he is one of my favorite religious examples of this. Francis referred to the birds as his brothers and sisters, the wolves as his brothers and sisters, a spider, he called it Sister Spider. He had a spider who lived in his cell with him, and he did not kill that spider. He was friendly with the spider, right? Francis sees all of these natural elements, including the non-living ones, such as brother, sun, and sister moon. He sees them as his kin, and sees himself as a citizen of a larger whole. And he's not the only one who sees life that way. We know that a lot of our Native American traditions regard non-human nature as kin, as other people who are somehow related to us in a sense. So that if that's your model for human action in nature, then you're going to treat them with quite a bit of respect. And if you're thinking in terms of a citizen, and I love this model of the citizen, how can we be a good citizen of our planet? Well, there's responsibilities, there's rights, right? I mean, we can use that citizen model to think about our duties with respect to the natural world. So this is another lovely model of human action in nature. And the last one I want to talk about is the idea of being a collaborator or a co-creator. This is an image that I got from a permaculture website. And that's one example, permaculture is one example of this, where humans, we understand the natural world, we learn its patterns and its processes, and then we try to fit ourselves in. right? Maybe we're not dominating, maybe we're not even stewarding, but instead we are a part of this larger whole, and we figure out how to collaborate with it. In a sense, we can be co-creators. So when you see people engaging in ecological restoration, where an area that has been degraded gets planted with new trees or gets restored to something that was there before, right? That's humans being co-creators. Humans saying, nature, I know what you wanted here. I'm gonna help make it happen. I think this is one of the more beautiful ways that humans can act in nature. We often think about humans as only destructive, but I think that's really false. Humans can be very constructive and very, very useful in nature. And this model reminds us of that. So again, practices like permaculture, practices like ecological restoration are practices where we can show that potential in our human actions, that we can be part of this larger whole. I want to address just really quickly this idea of misanthropic environmental ethics. I saw this recently on Twitter, and some of you may have seen this in social media. So on the left-hand side here, this is somebody's tweet. He's noticing that since the lockdown, the Venice Canal water has become clear, Italy coasts have dolphins coming nearer, Japan has deer roaming the streets, Thailand monkeys, China has record-breaking pollution cuts. By the way, some of those are not verified, but the pollution cuts are real. Like, because of our virus lockdown that's happening right now, we definitely are seeing less air pollution happening. So then he concludes, he says, the earth is healing. Plot twist, we were the virus all along. So I think this is a really interesting point of view, but I want to respectfully disagree. So I would argue that we humans are not a virus, and that this statement, we were the virus all along, is pretty misleading for a couple of reasons. One, we need to ask ourselves, who is we? Because not all humans have equal impact. This is something that we learn from environmental justice, climate justice, some of these other ways of thinking, where we realize that basically humans with more wealth tend to be the ones that have a larger impact. And spoiler alert, most of us in the United States have more wealth and are in that category. But there are people in other countries who have very little environmental impact, and it's not fair to lump all humans together. Secondly, we have a choice, unlike some creatures, right? Viruses, in some ways they can't really help it, right? Viruses infect their host, is what they do. We have a choice. We do not have to do as much damage as we do. I think this is what the lockdown teaches me, is that the damage that we're causing to the earth is to a large degree voluntary. So if we're choosing to do this, maybe we can choose not to, or at least to lighten up a little bit. That choice, it makes us very unique, actually, which is one of the things I love about humans. Humans have value and are worth saving. It is easy for environmentally minded people to become pretty down and upset and kind of pessimistic about humanity. And we have indeed caused a lot of damage to our planet. But the solution is not to get rid of all the humans, right? And so this is my last point. There are better ways to heal the planet than to kill off people. And this virus in particular is killing off vulnerable people. So there's definitely better ways than doing that. So I guess I'm delighted that the earth is healing, but I don't think that we are the virus. In fact, I think that we need to ask ourselves, how can we fulfill some of these models of human action in nature that in fact allow us to help the natural world? Which brings me to this next graphic. I just love this poster. So maybe you've heard of an environmental footprint or an ecological footprint. This is the idea of the sort of negative impact that you and I have on the natural world through our large degree of consumption, right? Maybe you haven't heard of the ecological handprint. The idea of an ecological handprint is that, yes, we have a footprint, we're causing some damage, but we can also have a positive impact. There are things that we can do that is healing. And I think, one of the biggest questions in our age is not how much do you earn or what do you produce. I think a question is, what do you preserve? What do you foster? What do you nourish? What do you nurture? How can we be a force for nurturing and for flourishing on this globe? So I want to end, because I have to be a little bit nerdy here, with some recommended reading. These are some great things to read. Aldo Leopold's Land Ethic and his Thinking Like a Mountain are amazing. This guy wrote these in like the 1940s, before people had really even figured out what ecology was. He figured out a lot of these things just through his intuition and his understanding of the natural world. Leopold has this excellent way of observing nature in a very attentive and detailed manner, and using that to synthesize a sense of ethics and of right and wrong with respect to how humans relate to nature. So he's pretty fantastic. I mentioned Wendell Berry earlier. If you like that agrarian viewpoint, then I highly recommend The Unsettling of America, The Gift of Good Land, and basically anything else that he's written. Everything is very high quality from Wendell Berry. And then I have to end with my favorite quote from a book like ever right now. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a Potawatomi author and a botanist. She's written this amazing book called Braiding Sweetgrass. The whole thing is remarkable. And one of my favorite passages, she says, "We are dreaming of a time when the land will give thanks for the people." And that is just amazing. Those of us in the environmental movement who have been fed the idea that humans are the problem and that humans are only destructive, I find a passage like this to be so inspiring and so nurturing, just to think maybe it's possible. Maybe there will be a time when the land will give thanks for the people. So I wanted to end with that and just thank you for your attention. I hope that you found this useful and thought-provoking. I hope this gives you some tools that you can use to talk with people in your circle about environmental ethics. So thanks again for your attention.